The waitress looked at me and whispered, "Ma'am, are you sure you're not waiting for someone?" I smiled, because it was my 72nd birthday, and I had been waiting for 3 hours. No one came. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story reaches." I had reserved the corner table at Willow Creek Bistro 2 weeks earlier. The same table my husband Robert and I used to request every year. The same table where my children once fought over dessert menus and my grandchildren colored on paper placemats while laughing loud enough to annoy other customers. Back then, the table always felt too small. That evening, it felt enormous. I arrived 30 minutes early. Old habit. Robert always hated being late. Even after 6 years without him, I still found myself checking the time the way he used to. The hostess led me to the table. 9 seats, 9 place settings, 9 folded menus. I ran my fingers across the smooth white tablecloth and smiled. Ashley would complain about the lighting. My son Daniel would ask for extra coffee. Emma would order salmon. Ben would pretend to steal French fries from everyone's plate. I knew all their little habits. That's what mothers do. We remember. 6 o'clock came. Then 6:15. Then 6:30. I checked my phone. Nothing. No texts. No calls. No apologies. Just silence. At 6:45, a young waiter approached. "Would you like to order while you wait?" I glanced at the empty chairs. "Not yet." He nodded politely. At 7 o'clock, I sent Daniel a message. No response. I called. Straight to voicemail. I tried Emma. Voicemail. Then Ashley. Voicemail. One after another. The same automated voice. The same emptiness. I stared out the restaurant window. Families were arriving. Couples were laughing. Someone across the street carried balloons. I suddenly felt much older than 72. At 7:20, the birthday candle the restaurant had placed beside my dessert finally melted into a crooked puddle of wax. Nobody noticed. Except me. A busboy quietly removed 3 extra chairs from my table. "Just to make room," he said softly. I nodded. I understood what he really meant. Even strangers could see what was happening. My family wasn't coming. At 7:30, the waitress returned. This time she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "are you sure you're not waiting for someone?" The question wasn't cruel. That made it worse. I smiled. "Yes," I said. I was. For a moment, her face fell. Then she quietly walked away. I sat there another 15 minutes. Not because I believed they were coming. Because I needed to know for certain. Hope is stubborn. Especially when it wears the face of your own children. Finally, I picked up my purse. As I stood, my phone vibrated. My heart jumped. For one foolish second, I thought it might be Daniel. Maybe there had been an accident. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe. I looked down. The notification wasn't from my family. It was from Facebook. A new post from Ashley, my daughter-in-law. I opened it. The first photograph hit me like ice water. Ashley stood beside Daniel, wearing designer sunglasses and a bright smile. Behind them rose snow-covered mountains. Aspen. The second photo showed my grandchildren. The third showed my daughter Emma holding a glass of champagne. The fourth showed everyone gathered around a large outdoor fire pit. Everyone. Every single person who was supposed to be sitting at my table. The caption read, "Perfect family weekend. So grateful for these moments." My hands went cold. I kept scrolling. Photo after photo. Laughter. Smiles. Matching jackets. Family. My family. A family trip nobody had mentioned. A family trip that somehow happened to fall on my birthday. Not one person had called. Not one person had texted. Not one person had said they wouldn't be coming. I stood frozen beside the empty table. Suddenly, a detail caught my attention. Ashley had uploaded the photos less than an hour earlier, which meant they had all known exactly where they were while I sat waiting. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't bad timing. This was a choice. A deliberate one. I paid the bill, even for the untouched meals I had pre-ordered. Then I walked toward the exit. Outside, the Colorado evening air felt sharp against my skin. The parking lot was almost empty. I unlocked my car and reached for the door handle. Then my phone vibrated again. Another message. This time from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Ethan Cole, my late husband's attorney. The message was short. Only one sentence. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need to discuss your estate immediately." I stared at the screen. For reasons I couldn't explain, a chill ran through me. Because Robert rarely did anything without a reason. And suddenly, I had the strange feeling that my husband had seen all of this coming long before I did. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot, staring at Ethan Cole's message. The screen had already gone dark, but I could still see the words in my mind. We need to discuss your estate immediately. Estate. It was a strange word. Cold. Clinical. The kind of word people use when discussing possessions instead of people. I started the engine and drove home through the quiet Colorado streets. The entire ride felt unreal. Not because my family had missed my birthday. That part wasn't new. What unsettled me was the realization that they hadn't forgotten. They had chosen not to come. There is a difference. A painful one. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch lights switched on automatically. For a moment, I found myself looking toward the front window. A habit. For 38 years, Robert would have been standing there waiting for me. Sometimes pretending not to watch. Always watching anyway. The house felt exactly as it had 6 years earlier when cancer took him. Too quiet. Too large. Too empty. I walked inside and set my purse on the kitchen counter. The birthday flowers I'd bought for myself that morning were still sitting in a vase near the sink. Bright yellow daisies. They suddenly looked ridiculous. I took off my coat, hung it carefully, then stood there, motionless, listening. Nothing. No television. No laughter. No voices. Only the hum of the refrigerator. I opened it. The small birthday cake I'd ordered for myself sat untouched on the middle shelf. Happy 72nd birthday, Margaret. The blue frosting looked almost cheerful. I closed the door. I wasn't hungry anymore. That night, sleep never came. Instead, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. And for the first time, I stopped looking at my birthday as an isolated event. I started seeing a pattern. A long one. A familiar one. A painful one. 3 years earlier, my granddaughter Lily had graduated from high school. I had bought a new dress for the ceremony. Nothing fancy. Just a pale blue dress that reminded me of something Robert used to like. Ashley called me the night before. "Oh no," she had said. "Didn't Daniel tell you?" My stomach tightened immediately. "Tell me what?" The school changed the ceremony time. I remember scrambling for a pen, writing down the new schedule, thanking her for letting me know. The next morning I arrived exactly when she told me. The parking lot was empty. The auditorium doors were locked. Confused, I called Daniel. His voice sounded strange. "Mom, where are you?" "At the school." A long silence followed. Then came the words I still remember. "The ceremony ended an hour ago." I stood there holding my phone while families carried flowers and balloons toward their cars. Everyone was leaving. Everyone except me. Later, Ashley claimed it had been an innocent mistake. I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. Another memory surfaced. Thanksgiving. 2 years ago. Daniel called 3 days before. "We're keeping it small this year, Mom." His voice sounded rushed. Almost rehearsed. I told him I understood. I spent Thanksgiving alone. Made myself a turkey sandwich. Watched old movies. Tried not to feel sorry for myself. The following morning, Emma accidentally posted photos online. 22 people. 2 long dining tables. Children everywhere. Neighbors. Friends. Cousins. Everyone had been invited. Everyone except me. When I asked Daniel about it later, he sounded uncomfortable. "Oh, Ashley thought you might be tired from the drive." The drive was 20 minutes. 20. I remember hanging up and staring at the phone for a long time. Back then, I convinced myself it wasn't intentional. Now I wasn't so sure. As the hours passed that night, more memories emerged. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Christmas dinners. School plays. Birthday. Parties. Barbecues. Family vacations. Every time there had been an explanation. Every time there had been an excuse. Every time there had been Ashley. I sat up in bed around 3 in the morning. A thought suddenly occurred to me. One that made my chest tighten. What if this had never been random? What if I hadn't been forgotten? What if I had been removed? The difference between those two things felt enormous. Forgotten is accidental. Removed is deliberate. I got out of bed and walked downstairs. The house creaked beneath my feet. Robert used to joke that the old place talked at night. I almost smiled thinking about it. Almost. Instead, I found myself standing in front of a framed family photograph on the living room shelf. It had been taken 7 years earlier. Before Robert got sick. Before everything changed. Daniel stood beside me. Emma was smiling. The grandchildren were younger. Ashley stood in the center. Not beside the family. In the center. I stared at the picture for a long time. Then something struck me. Every painful memory from the last several years seemed to lead back to one person. Ashley, the wrong graduation time. Ashley, the Thanksgiving exclusion. Ashley, the family trips I learned about afterward. Ashley, the canceled visits. The missing invitations. The awkward excuses. Ashley, Ashley, Ashley. I suddenly remembered something else. Something I hadn't thought about in years. 6 months before Robert died, he had asked me a strange question. What do you think people reveal when they believe nobody is paying attention? At the time, I laughed. I thought it was one of his philosophical moods. Now, lying awake in the darkness, the memory felt different. Important. Almost like a warning. I looked toward the clock. For 17 a.m. morning was still hours away. But I knew I wasn't going back to sleep. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking why my family missed my birthday. I was asking something far more troubling. How long had this been happening? And why had Robert seemed to see it before I did? The next morning, I made coffee before sunrise. Not because I was awake, because I had never really gone to sleep. The questions from the night before were still circling in my mind. How long had this been happening? And why had Robert seemed to notice it before I did? The house felt colder than usual. I carried my coffee into the living room and sat in Robert's favorite chair. For years, I had avoided sitting there. It felt wrong somehow, like occupying a space that still belonged to him. But that morning, I needed to feel close to him, needed to remember, needed to understand. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the windows. Dust floated quietly through the air. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to think about the years before everything changed. Back when Robert was still alive. Back when family gatherings actually felt like family gatherings. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, I wasn't so sure. Robert had built a successful construction company over 4 decades. Nothing glamorous. Just honest work. Long hours. Early mornings. Calloused hands. He was the kind of man who believed a person's word mattered. The kind of man who showed up. Always. When Daniel wanted to start his own landscaping business, Robert loaned him $40,000. No contracts. No interest. No repayment schedule. Just trust. He's my son, Robert said. He'll do the right thing. The money was never repaid. Not a single dollar. Whenever I brought it up, Daniel always had a reason. Business was slow. The economy was difficult. Expenses were higher than expected. There was always an excuse. And Robert always nodded. Always gave him another chance. Then there was Emma. 3 years before Robert died, she called us in tears. Her SUV had broken down. She couldn't afford a replacement. Without hesitation, Robert wrote her a check. $32,000. I remember watching him sign it. She needs reliable transportation, he said. Emma promised she would pay him back. She never did. A few months later, she showed up driving a luxury SUV that cost considerably more than the one Robert had paid for. I remember Robert staring at it through the kitchen window. Not angry, just disappointed. That expression stayed with me. Now I understood why. At the time, I thought he was upset about the money. Maybe it wasn't the money at all. Maybe it was what the money revealed. People value what they earn. They often take for granted what they inherit. Around that same period, Ashley began appearing more frequently. Not to visit. To ask questions. Questions that seemed harmless at first. Questions I barely noticed. Have you two updated your will recently? Who takes care of the house if something happens? Have you thought about downsizing? Small questions. Casual questions. The kind people ask during ordinary conversations. Or so I thought. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found Ashley sitting with Robert. They stopped talking the moment I entered. The room fell silent. I remember laughing awkwardly. Did I interrupt something? Ashley smiled immediately. Too quickly. No, of course not. Then she changed the subject. Back then, I let it go. Today, that memory felt different. Much different. As more pieces surfaced, I found myself noticing patterns everywhere. Ashley was always interested in finances. Always curious about assets. Always asking about future plans. Never directly. Always carefully. Like someone testing the depth of water before stepping in. And then there was something else. Something I had nearly forgotten. About a year before Robert passed away, we hosted a family barbecue. Everyone came. The grandchildren played in the yard. The adults gathered around the patio. At one point, I stepped inside to refill drinks. When I returned, I overheard Ashley speaking. She didn't know I was nearby. I mean, eventually all this will be Daniel's anyway. I stopped walking. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Then she laughed. A short laugh. Confident. Certain. One of the neighbors responded. Hopefully that's a long way off. Ashley smiled. I wouldn't count on that. The conversation shifted before anyone noticed me standing there. I never told Robert what I heard. I didn't want to create conflict. Didn't want to start drama. Now I wished I had. Because suddenly every memory seemed connected. Every strange comment. Every awkward silence. Every missing invitation. Every convenient misunderstanding. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. And then another memory surfaced. One that made my stomach tighten. 6 months before Robert died, he came home unusually quiet. After dinner, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he looked up. His expression was serious. More serious than I had seen in years. "Margaret," he said softly, "if something ever happens to me, promise me you'll pay attention to people's actions, not their words." I laughed nervously. That's a strange thing to say. But Robert didn't smile. He simply looked down at his coffee. Then he added something I never forgot. Some people become very different when they think the future belongs to them. At the time, I thought he was talking about business. Now, sitting alone in the same house years later, I realized something chilling. He wasn't talking about business at all. And suddenly, I found myself wondering something I had never considered before. What exactly had Robert discovered during the final months of his life? And was that the reason Ethan Cole suddenly wanted to see me now? The rest of that morning passed slowly. Too slowly. I kept hearing Robert's words in my head. Some people become very different when they think the future belongs to them. For years, I had treated those words like a strange memory. Now they felt like a warning. By noon, I couldn't sit still any longer. I walked upstairs to our old bedroom. The room hadn't changed much since Robert passed away. His side of the closet remained untouched. His favorite watch still sat inside the top drawer. A faded baseball cap still hung on the corner post of the bed. People told me I should move on. Maybe they were right. But some things aren't about moving on. Some things are about remembering. I opened the closet and reached for an old storage box on the top shelf. It was filled with papers, tax returns, insurance documents, old photographs, the ordinary pieces of a long life together. I wasn't looking for anything specific. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I think I was searching for Robert. Searching for answers. Searching for proof that I hadn't imagined. Everything. As I sorted through the documents, a yellow envelope slipped from between two folders. My name was written on the front. Margaret. Nothing else. No date. No explanation. Just my name. My heart immediately began beating faster. I recognized the handwriting. Robert's. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The message was short. Very short. Yet somehow it felt heavier than everything else in the box. Margaret, if you're reading this, I was right to be worried. Pay attention. Watch who appears when money is mentioned. Watch who disappears when it isn't. Trust actions, not promises. Love, Robert. I read the note 3 times. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. Each time, it felt more unsettling. Because Robert wasn't a dramatic man. He wasn't suspicious. He wasn't paranoid. For him to write something like that, something had frightened him. Something serious. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the note. Suddenly, another memory returned. A conversation from the final year of Robert's life. At the time, his health had already begun declining. The treatments were exhausting. The hospital visits became frequent. One evening after a doctor's appointment, Daniel came by the house. Alone. Ashley wasn't with him. At first, the visit seemed normal. Concerned son. Concerned father. Ordinary conversation. Then Robert stepped outside to answer a phone call. The moment he left the room, Daniel leaned toward me. Have you two thought about simplifying things? I frowned. Simplifying what? The house. The property. The estate. The word again. Estate. Even back then, I remember feeling uncomfortable. Why would we need to do that? Daniel shrugged. You know, just making things easier for everyone later. Later. Not now. Later. I didn't think much about it at the time. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Robert returned a few minutes later. The conversation ended immediately, almost too quickly, as if Daniel didn't want him hearing it. That evening, after Daniel left, Robert stood at the kitchen window, watching his truck disappear down the road. He looked troubled. I remember asking him if something was wrong. His answer was simple. No. But I knew my husband. That answer meant yes. A few weeks after that, another strange incident happened. One I had nearly forgotten. Ashley showed up unexpectedly one afternoon, carrying coffee and pastries. Friendly. Cheerful. Far more cheerful than usual. She spent almost an hour asking questions. Questions about retirement. Questions about insurance. Questions about property taxes. Questions about bank accounts. At one point, Robert finally smiled and asked her directly, "Planning to become a financial advisor?" Ashley laughed, a little too loudly. "A girl has to learn." Everyone laughed. But I remember catching Robert's expression. He wasn't laughing. He was watching, observing, measuring. The way he used to study blueprints before starting construction on a new project. Looking for weaknesses. Looking for hidden problems. At the time, I didn't understand what he was seeing. Now I wondered if he had already figured everything out. Maybe years before I did. I looked back down at the letter in my hands. The handwriting suddenly felt different. Less like a note. More like instructions. A roadmap left behind by someone who knew he wouldn't be there to protect me. The thought made my chest ache. Not because of the money. Not because of the estate. Because Robert had spent his final months worrying about me. While I spent those same months believing everything was fine. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Then I noticed something else inside the storage box. A business card. White. Plain. Almost hidden beneath an old insurance folder. I picked it up. Ethan Cole, attorney at law. On the back, written in Robert's handwriting, were 6 words. Call him if things get worse. I stared at the card. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Because Robert had written those words nearly 6 years ago. Long before my birthday. Long before the Aspen trip. Long before all the pieces started fitting together. Which meant only one thing. My husband hadn't been guessing. He had known something. And for the first time, I found myself wondering whether Ethan Cole's meeting wasn't about my estate at all. Maybe it was about something Robert had been trying to tell me for years. I didn't wait until the next day. The moment I found Robert's note and the business card, I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From anticipation. 6 years. 6 years since Robert passed away. And suddenly it felt as if he were still guiding me. Still leaving breadcrumbs behind. The phone rang twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "Margaret." I froze. Ethan Cole sounded exactly the same. Older, perhaps. A little slower. But unmistakably Ethan. "Hello, Ethan." There was a brief silence. Then he sighed. "I've been waiting for this call." The words immediately caught my attention. Waiting. Not hoping. Not expecting. Waiting. As though Robert had told him this day would eventually come. "When can you come in?" he asked. I glanced at the clock. "How about this afternoon?" "That would be best." His tone was calm. Professional. Yet there was something beneath it. Something serious. Something carefully controlled. 3 hours later, I parked outside Ethan's office. The building looked exactly as I remembered. Brick exterior. Small brass sign. Quiet street. Nothing impressive. Robert trusted people like Ethan. People who didn't need to impress anyone. The receptionist greeted me and led me into a conference room. Ethan was already waiting. When he stood to shake my hand, his expression softened. "You look good, Margaret." I smiled politely. "That's a generous lie." For the first time, he laughed. Then his face became serious again. Very serious. He sat down across from me and folded his hands. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked directly into my eyes. "Have things gotten worse?" Not, "How have you been?" Not, "How is your family?" Just one question. Have things gotten worse? Immediately, I knew. Robert had told him something. A lot of something. I slowly nodded. Yes. Ethan leaned back in his chair, almost as if he had expected that answer. Then he opened a thick folder sitting on the table. The folder was labeled, Whitmore Family File. My stomach tightened. Family file. Not estate file. Not trust documents. Family file. I watched as Ethan carefully removed several documents. Some looked familiar. Others didn't. Then he slid a yellow legal pad toward me. Written across the top was a date. 8 months before Robert died. "What is this?" I asked. Ethan adjusted his glasses. "Notes." "Whose notes?" "Robert's." I stared at him. "Robert's notes?" My husband kept almost no notes. He hated paperwork. He hated writing things down. Ethan seemed to read my thoughts. He started documenting things near the end. The room suddenly felt smaller. Documenting what? Ethan paused. Then he gave an answer I wasn't prepared for. Behavior. I blinked. What behavior? The family's. A chill ran through me. Ethan opened the first page. Several entries appeared underneath. Dates. Observations. Conversations. Small incidents. At first glance they seemed insignificant. Then I started reading. Daniel asking unusual questions about ownership documents. Ashley requesting copies of property records. Emma repeatedly bringing up inheritance topics. Page after page, month after month, carefully recorded, methodically organized. I felt as though I were reading a stranger's notebook, not Robert's. Yet the handwriting was unmistakably his. Then one particular entry caught my eye. The date was approximately 7 months before his death. Robert had written, Ashley asked whether Margaret's name appears on every account. I looked up. What does that mean? Ethan remained silent. I continued reading. The next line made my chest tighten. When I asked why she wanted to know, she changed the subject immediately. I stared at the page. That sounded exactly like Ashley. Friendly, curious, always asking, never explaining. I turned another page, then another. Each one revealed something new, something uncomfortable, something I had completely missed at the time. Finally, I reached a page marked with a red paper clip. Ethan stopped me. Read that one carefully. I looked down. The entry was longer than the others. Much longer. Robert had written nearly an entire page. The first sentence made my blood run cold. I believe certain members of the family have become more interested in our future assets than our present lives. I read it twice, then a third time. The sentence felt devastating, not because it came from me, because it came from Robert, the man who always believed the best about people, the man who trusted everyone. If even Robert had reached that conclusion, how bad had things actually become? I slowly looked up. Ethan. My voice barely worked. When did he write all of this? Ethan's answer came immediately, after he realized what was happening. I felt my heart sink. What exactly did he realize? For the first time since I arrived, Ethan hesitated. A long hesitation, the kind that changes everything. Then he reached into the folder, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it gently on the table between us. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Robert. Across the front were 4 simple words. For Margaret only. I stared at the envelope, then at Ethan, then back at the envelope. Because somehow I knew. Whatever was inside had the potential to explain everything, and maybe reveal just how much Robert had been hiding from me during the final months of his life. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The envelope sat on the table between Ethan and me. Simple, ordinary, yet it felt heavier than anything I had ever held. Robert's handwriting covered the front. For Margaret only. No date, no explanation, just those 3 words. I slowly reached for it. My fingers trembled, not because I was afraid of what was inside, because I already suspected it would change everything. Ethan remained silent. He didn't rush me, didn't offer advice, didn't explain. He simply waited, the same way a doctor waits for test results to sink in. Finally, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long. The first line immediately brought tears to my eyes. Not because it was sad, because it sounded exactly like Robert. Margaret, if you're reading this, then I was right to leave these instructions behind. Instructions. Not warnings. Not accusations. Instructions. My chest tightened. I continued reading. I hope I was wrong about everything. More than anything, I hope this letter never becomes necessary. I stopped for a moment. That was Robert, always hoping for the best, even when preparing for the worst. I kept reading. The next paragraph made my stomach drop. Over the past 2 years, I have noticed changes in people I never expected to see. People, not person. People, plural. I felt my pulse quicken. The letter continued. I began paying attention after conversations repeatedly shifted toward money, ownership, property, and inheritance. At first, I dismissed it. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. I swallowed hard. The pattern. The exact same thing I had begun noticing. Only Robert had seen it years earlier. Further down the page, another sentence stood out. I am not concerned about my assets. I am concerned about you. I stopped reading. My vision blurred slightly. Not because of money. Not because of inheritance. Because Robert had spent his final months worrying about what would happen to me after he was gone. And he had been right. Painfully right. I took a deep breath and continued. Then I reached the section Ethan had apparently wanted me to see. A section highlighted in yellow. Robert wrote, if family members suddenly become more attentive after my death, pay close attention to the timing. I stared at the words. Suddenly dozens of memories rushed back. Phone calls that appeared out of nowhere. Unexpected visits. Birthday cards that arrived after months of silence. Ashley showing up with coffee. Daniel suddenly asking about my health. Emma checking in after long periods of absence. At the time, I had viewed those moments as kindness. Now I wasn't sure. I kept reading. The next sentence felt like a punch. True concern appears before opportunities. False concern appears after them. I lowered the paper. The room felt very quiet. Too quiet. Because deep down, I knew exactly what he meant. The realization was painful, but not surprising anymore. Ethan finally spoke. Keep reading. I nodded. The final pages contained something different. Not observations. Not warnings. Evidence. Specific examples. Specific dates. Specific incidents. Conversations Robert had documented. One entry immediately caught my attention. It described a dinner 6 months before his death. I remembered that dinner. Ashley had spent nearly 20 minutes discussing retirement communities. At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Robert's notes told a different story. According to him, Ashley repeatedly steered the conversation toward what would happen to the house if one of us passed away. Then came another note. This one involved Daniel. Apparently, he had asked Robert whether ownership documents were stored in a safe. I didn't remember that conversation. Robert did. He remembered everything. Every question. Every unusual comment. Every uncomfortable moment. The deeper I read, the more I realized something terrifying. Robert hadn't created a file because of one incident. He created it because there were dozens. Maybe hundreds. Small things. Tiny moments. Each harmless by itself. Together, impossible to ignore. Eventually, I reached the final page. The final paragraph. And the final instruction. I read it twice to make sure I understood. Then a third time. My heart started pounding. Slowly, I looked up at Ethan. Did he really do this? Ethan nodded. Yes. I looked back down. The instruction was clear. Crystal clear. Robert had ordered a complete review of every estate document after his death. Not immediately. Only if certain conditions were met. Only if Ethan believed his concerns had become reality. I suddenly understood why Ethan had sent that message after my birthday. Something had changed. Something significant. Something that convinced him Robert's fears had come true. What triggered this? I asked quietly. Ethan leaned forward. For the first time all afternoon, his expression hardened. Then he opened another section of the file. A section I hadn't seen before. Several printed pages. Emails. Messages. Documents. Evidence. Real evidence. Not suspicions. Not opinions. Evidence. He slid the stack toward me. At the very top was a printed email. The sender's name made my stomach turn. Ashley. The subject line was short. Only 5 words. But those 5 words instantly changed the entire story. I stared at the page, unable to breathe, because suddenly I realized Robert's concerns had never been guesses. They had been based on something far worse. Something Ashley never intended for me to see. And whatever was written in that email was about to reveal how long she had truly been planning for my future without me. I stared at the email. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to read it. Ashley's name sat at the top of the page. The date immediately caught my attention. 3 years ago. 3 years. Not 3 weeks. Not 3 months. 3 years. Whatever this was, it hadn't started recently. It had been happening for a very long time. Slowly, I lowered my eyes to the subject line. Future planning discussion. My stomach tightened. Future planning. Such harmless words. Such dangerous intentions. I began reading. The email had been sent to Daniel. The first paragraph seemed ordinary. Discussion about finances. Long-term goals. Family responsibilities. Nothing unusual. Then I reached the second paragraph. Everything changed. Your mother is healthy now, but we should probably start thinking ahead before decisions become more complicated. I felt my grip tighten on the paper. Your mother. Not Margaret. Not Mom. Your mother. As though I were a problem to be managed. An obstacle to prepare for. I continued reading. The next sentence hit even harder. The house is obviously the largest asset. Asset. Not home. Asset. The place where Robert and I raised our children. The place where every Christmas morning happened. The place where birthdays were celebrated. The place where memories lived. To Ashley, it was an asset. A number. A future transaction. I swallowed hard. Then came another line. One I knew I would never forget. If we're smart about timing, everything should transition smoothly. Transition. Such a polite word. Such a cold word. I slowly lowered the paper. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Ethan remained silent, giving me time, giving me space. Finally, I looked up. How did Robert get this? Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't. I frowned. What do you mean? This came later. My confusion deepened. Ethan slid another document across the table. Then another. Then another. Emails. Text messages. Conversations. Some complete. Some partial. All connected. All pointing in the same direction. The deeper I read, the worse it became. One message from Ashley described the house as eventually available. Another referred to future inheritance as expected assets. Expected, not hoped for. Expected, as though everything had already been promised. As though I no longer mattered. Then I found something even more painful. A text conversation between Ashley and Emma. My daughter. My own daughter. I felt sick before I even started reading. The exchange wasn't long. Only a few messages. But each one landed like a stone. Ashley, has your mom mentioned changing anything? Emma, not that I know of. Ashley, good. Good. Just one word. One tiny word. Yet somehow it hurt more than everything else. Because it revealed certainty. Comfort. Confidence. The confidence of someone who believes the future is already theirs. I sat back in my chair. My heart felt heavy. Not because of Ashley anymore. Ashley wasn't blood. She never was. What hurt was Emma. Daniel. My children. The children Robert and I spent our lives raising. The children we sacrificed for. The children we trusted. At some point, Ethan quietly placed a box of tissues on the table. I hadn't realized tears were running down my face. I quickly wiped them away. Not out of embarrassment. Out of disappointment. I was tired of crying over people who never cried for me. Eventually, Ethan spoke. There is something else. I looked up. His tone had changed. Again. More serious. More cautious. The way someone sounds when approaching dangerous territory. What? He opened another folder. This one thinner. Smaller. But somehow more intimidating. Then he removed a single document. A property inquiry request. The address immediately caught my attention. My house. My exact address. I stared at it. Confused. Then I noticed the date. 8 months ago. Long before my birthday. Long before the Aspen trip. Long before everything exploded. My pulse quickened. Why would someone request this? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned the page. At the bottom appeared a name. Ashley Whitmore. The room went silent. I stared at the document. Then back at Ethan. Then back at the document again. There had to be a mistake. There simply had to be. Ashley had requested information about my property. Without telling me. Without asking me. Without any reason I could imagine. What was she doing? My voice sounded distant. Even to me. Ethan folded his hands. We don't know for certain. That wasn't the answer I wanted. I looked at him. He understood. Then he added something that made my stomach drop. But we do know she contacted a real estate professional shortly afterward. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. A real estate professional. About my house. My house. Not hers. Mine. Suddenly, every strange conversation about downsizing came rushing back. Every suggestion about retirement communities. Every comment about maintenance. Every casual remark about the size of the property. None of it felt casual anymore. None of it. I stared through the conference room window. The parking lot outside looked ordinary. People walked by. Cars came and went. Life continued. Yet inside that room, my entire understanding of my family was collapsing. And then Ethan said something that changed everything again. There is one more file. I turned back toward him. His expression was unreadable. What file? For several seconds he said nothing. Then he slid a sealed manila envelope onto the table. Unlike the others, this one had never been opened. Across the front, in Robert's handwriting, were 7 words. Open only if they show their hand. I felt my heart start pounding. Because for the first time, I wasn't wondering whether Robert had been right. I already knew he was. The only question left was how much he had actually known. I couldn't stop staring at the envelope. Open only if they show their hand. Robert's handwriting looked steady, certain, almost as if he had known this day would come. For several seconds, neither Ethan nor I spoke. Then I carefully opened it. Inside was a single legal document, along with a handwritten letter. I read the letter first, because after everything I had discovered, I needed to hear Robert's voice one more time. Margaret, if Ethan has given this to you, then I was right. And if I was right, I am sorry. Not because of the money. Because it means the people we loved chose something else over us. I felt tears forming immediately. I kept reading. I know. This will hurt. But I need you to remember something. Their choices are not a reflection of your worth. They are a reflection of their character. I pressed my lips together, trying to stay composed, trying not to break apart in Ethan's office. Then I reached the final paragraph, and suddenly everything made sense. I changed the estate plan 6 months before my death. Not to punish anyone, to protect you. I slowly lowered the letter, then picked up the legal document, the amended trust, the final version, the version I had never seen. My eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then the third, and suddenly I understood why Ethan had called me, why Robert had documented everything, why he had left instructions, why he had waited. The trust contained a condition, a very specific condition. Any beneficiary who deliberately isolated, manipulated, exploited, or financially pressured either Robert or me would immediately lose their inheritance rights. I looked up at Ethan. He nodded. Robert insisted on that clause. I sat back in my chair, stunned. For years, I had believed Robert left everything equally to the family. That wasn't entirely true. He had left them an opportunity, not a guarantee. And according to the evidence in front of us, several people had already destroyed that opportunity themselves. The room felt strangely peaceful. Not because I was happy, because for the first time in years, everything finally made sense. The confusion was gone. The excuses were gone. The self-doubt was gone. A week later, I made a decision. I invited everyone to dinner. Daniel, Emma, Ashley, the grandchildren, everyone. The response was immediate, almost enthusiastic, far more enthusiastic than they had been about my birthday. That told me everything I needed to know. Saturday evening arrived. The house filled quickly. Laughter, smiles, hugs, concern, attention. The kind of attention I hadn't received in years. Ashley even brought flowers. Daniel offered to help with dishes. Emma kept asking if I needed anything. It was almost convincing. Almost. As dinner ended, I stood and cleared my throat. The room became quiet. I have something important to share. Immediately, every face turned toward me. I noticed it then. The anticipation, the expectation, the certainty. They thought they already knew what was coming. They thought the future belonged to them, just like Robert had warned. I looked at Ethan, who had quietly joined us. Then I handed him the folder. He began reading. The room changed almost immediately. Smiles disappeared. Expressions tightened. Eyes widened. Especially when he reached the clause. The clause. The one Robert had written. The one none of them knew existed. When Ethan explained the findings, nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Nobody denied it. Because the evidence spoke for itself. Emails, messages, property inquiries, documented conversations, years of behavior, all carefully preserved, all impossible to explain away. Finally, Ashley broke the silence. This isn't fair. Her voice shook. I looked at her calmly. For the first time in years, I wasn't intimidated, wasn't confused, wasn't seeking approval. No, I said softly. The last 6 years weren't fair. The room became silent again. Daniel looked devastated. Emma looked ashamed. Ashley looked angry. But none of those reactions changed the truth. And for once, I wasn't responsible for managing their feelings. A month later, I finalized my own decisions. A portion of the estate would support the local library Robert loved. Another portion would fund scholarships for children in Cedar Ridge. The rest would go to the one grandchild who consistently visited me without asking for anything. Lily, the same granddaughter who called every Sunday. The same granddaughter who showed up on ordinary Tuesdays. The same granddaughter who never treated love like a transaction. When she learned about it, she cried. Not because of the money, because she missed her grandfather. Just like I did. Today, the house is still quiet, but it doesn't feel empty anymore. Sometimes I sit by the front window and watch the sunset over the mountains. The same window where Robert once stood. The same view we shared for decades. And every now and then, I think about that birthday. The empty table. The empty chairs. The restaurant. The silence. At the time, it felt like the worst day of my life. Now I understand it was something else. It was the day the truth finally arrived. My family ignored me for years. Then they saw my will. But by then, Robert had already seen them. And because he did, he left me something far more valuable than money. He left me the truth. And in the end, the truth gave me back my peace.